and did what I thought was a very good opening speech. And I got off the mic, and Jindi Singh, who I understand is the new president of the World Sikh Organization, came up to me and said, brother, you didn't say Fateh. I was like, oh, I never do that. I've never done that before. And that's just to locate myself a little bit on my journey in relationship with Sikhi. It's something that I started identifying with maybe about 10 years ago. I think before that, I was very much in the mode of a spiritualist and trying to kind of discover myself maybe through Punjabi identity initially. And I think there's still some complexity there. But I'm new to Sikh spaces and I'm learning. And one of the reasons for producing an event like tonight's is very much a selfish reason, right? There's people that I want to hear from. There's conversations I want to see happen. There's things that I want to see happening in the Sikh community. And through them, I'm not here as somebody that knows anything. I'm here as a servant, as somebody that wants to put some time in volunteering and maybe doing some seva for the community. But more than anything, connecting with the Sikh community and learning from them. So I'm the director and co-founder of a locally infamous and internationally feared organization called Poetic Justice Foundation. We develop educational content and workshops to disrupt systems of oppression. The more oppressive you are, the more disruptive we're going to seem to you. Specifically, we focus on casteism and racism initiatives, and we express solidarity with marginalized people from all walks of life. So before I begin, I'd like to recognize that we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Semiahmoo, the Kutsi, the Coquitlam, the Kwantlen, the Kikite, and Tawasin First Nations. There was an entire indigenous civilization here that was dispossessed of their land, culture, language, and brutalized in a genocide that we as settlers continue to benefit from today. We're settlers on someone else's land, and so we have a duty to reach out to build relationships and support and help indigenous communities in their efforts to secure their future, their culture, and reassert ownership over their homelands. This week also marks 39 years since the Sikh genocide that was enacted in 1984. We remember the days of rampant state-sanctioned violence and murder in the beginning of November, when Sikh people were attacked and killed all over Punjab and wherever Sikh communities existed in all of India. This is a period when even children weren't spared, women were raped, and no family was left unaffected. We recognize that this was a planned action of an ongoing policy meant to permanently disfigure the Sikh psyche and eliminate the Sikh people. In speaking about genocide as an opening for today's program, I was trying to think of what the word means, because the term itself seems a little cold. It's a little clinical, right? Almost inhumane. And what we're talking about is the elimination of people and way of life. So when you want to eliminate people and a way of life, you got to kill their children. And the future of a people really lies in our children. So we've seen this in Canada through both the murders and the brutal cultural erasure that took place in residential schools. We've seen this in centuries of Sikh history, where tyrants and oppressors of the time would tell their generals to eliminate the children of Sikh warriors so that they wouldn't have to deal with them generations from now. And we're also seeing that in another massacre that's unfolding before our eyes. And I'm speaking, of course, of Palestine. So as we remember the Sikh genocide, I would ask that community members continue to stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine, who've also been dispossessed of their ancestral homes, where they've lived in a virtual state of apartheid for 75 years. In the past many weeks, we've seen lost children, parents, loved ones, entire families decimated. And this is also the latest in an ongoing policy to eliminate all Palestinian presence in that region. So at this moment, all I have for you is a remembrance that these genocides have occurred. It's a reminder that these attempts at elimination are never successful. And it's a remembrance that our humanity can prevail. And it's a reminder that we have a responsibility to speak for the voiceless and to act for the defenseless. So again, thank you all for coming today. Tonight's event is being produced in partnership with the World Sikh Organization of Canada. We reached out to them and our speakers many months ago with a simple intention to have a conversation about where we're going as a community and the real challenge and threats that we face as a community. So I'd like to thank our community partners as well who helped us promote this event, Khalsa Aid, the North American Sikh Association, Sikh Heritage Month BC, and the Sikh Press Association. So I already mentioned that our interest, in putting this event together, one was a selfish one. It was to experience and learn from people in our community. And the other one was to actually maybe develop some new rituals and habits and muscle memory in our community. Our community is incredibly powerful when faced with threat, when we are reacting to oppressive forces. There is nobody more united and more dynamic than I think the Sikh populace. In fact, I think there's a lie that the Sikh people have begun to believe about themselves, that we're divided, right? And I think this lie was put to rest 2.5 years ago during the farmers' protest, when a supposedly divided community globally was showing up with one singular voice. So I think we're incredible in those moments of resistance. And what I'm hoping that we can also develop, at least locally, is a habit around venues like this, of having conversations, of getting together, challenging each other, without always drawing battle lines, right? Without always creating in-groups and out-groups. And I'm actually hoping that today's conversation is challenging, right? I'm hoping that we have some productive arguments. And we need that. We need very productive arguments in our community, because only through those can we build foundations and move on. So we have a lot to teach the world, and even to deal with the challenges that we face today, from climate change to geopolitics. We have some of the best social technology that was ever developed, right? And these are the principles of Sikhi. This is what was laid down by our gurus, who showed us how to work together to elevate all of humanity and to shatter sorrow wherever we find it. So now let's meet some remarkable people. I'm going to invite our panel onto the stage, including our moderator, who will be Michelle Eliot from CBC Vancouver. So I'd like her and the panel to please join me on stage. And as they're getting seated, I'm going to introduce Michelle. So Michelle is an award-winning journalist and the host of CBC British Columbia, the weekly call-in show called BC Today, where she engages in conversation with listeners on the day's top stories. Michelle's hosted numerous CBC news specials, including election and provincial budget coverage on both local and network programs. She's been recognized by the Radio, Television, Digital News Association, the Jack Webster Foundation, for stories that delved into the opioid crisis, the immigrant experience in Canada, and for her coverage of the 2017 NDP Green Deal for the minority government of BC. And we invited Michelle and CBC Vancouver to join us today because we've always believed in bridge building. And I think there's a lot of valid critique that the Sikh community has of mainstream media and the challenges of mainstream media. And the challenges in mainstream media are the same ones faced in many areas, which is resources and lack of time and interest or information leads to sort of journalistic laziness that sometimes creates situations where we see the same tropes and cliches about our community that are devoid of any depth, complexity, or nuance being trumpeted time and again. And so tonight, hopefully, is an opportunity to start working more closely with CBC and other mainstream media organizations. But more than anything else, it's to invite someone who is, I think, tangentially connected to the community. Michelle, unless you're a Sikh, and I didn't know that. Okay. And to, from that perspective, be able to test and challenge and inquire about the community and the challenges we're facing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mo. Yes, my name is Michelle Eliot. I host a phone-in show on CBC. It is my honor to be here with you this evening. And I do come as a Filipino-Canadian settler, immigrant. I came here as a 12-year-old from the Philippines. And I think the idea of bridge building is an important one. And so I'm here as a moderator. My role is to facilitate this conversation among our panelists, with you as well. There will be a town hall portion to tonight's event. And so I'm here to help moderate and help you have this conversation, a candid and honest and open conversation. And my role is also to listen and learn. And so that's my goal for tonight. And I'm very thankful to be here with you this evening. And as I mentioned, we're going to open this up to our audience as well later on this evening. There are mic stands in the aisles. So once we finish a bit of an opener conversation with our panel members, do feel free to come up, and we ask that you have a question that you can pose and just ensure that you are succinct with your point so that everybody gets a chance. And now let me introduce our esteemed panel. Dr. Sharanjit Kaur Sandhra is a historian, Sessional faculty in the Department of History at the University of the Fraser Valley, and founder of Belonging Matters Consulting. Now, before this, Sharon worked as coordinator at the South Asian Studies Institute at UFV for more than 12 years, and as co-curator and co-manager of the Sikh Heritage Museum, National Historic Site, and Gur Sikh Temple, Gurdwara. Sharon's PhD looks at the affective experiences of museum visitors through a critical race theory lens, with a dissertation titled Museums as Spaces of Belonging, Racialized Power in the Margins. She's a passionate activist and has been featured in the Knowledge Network series BC, An Untold History. Sharon is also a published author and has been featured on local, international podcasts and media. Jindi Singh is a national director of Khalsa Aid Canada, and an organization founded on the principle of recognizing the whole human race as one. Now, Jindi was integral to Khalsa Aid's inception, participating in its original UK team's humanitarian efforts. Under his guidance, Khalsa Aid Canada has established 13 independent chapters nationwide, providing support for food banks, nonprofits, international students, and Indigenous communities. Now, Singh champions a philosophy of respectful engagement and empowerment within these communities across the country. Internationally, Khalsa Aid continues to provide essential aid and support to global humanitarian crises. Aside from his humanitarian work, Jindi has also written extensively about disinformation about Sikhs, security concerns, and countering some of the false narratives used to attack Sikh activists. Rumneek Johal is the BC reporter for PressProgress. Rumneek works with PressProgress with a dedication to social justice and storytelling that uplifts marginalized voices. Holding an MA in journalism from the University of British Columbia, Johal has a history of significant media engagement, having worked with CBC News, Daily Hive, and as a host for the Decomplicated podcast by Overstory Media. And prior to joining PressProgress, Johal served as editor-in-chief at 5 Express, focusing on South Asian arts and culture for youth. And Johal is committed to reporting on issues overlooked by larger media outlets, including far-right organizing and the impact of economic policies on diverse communities. And finally, Balpreet Singh is legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada, and he serves as full-time legal counsel. A graduate of the University of Ottawa Law School, he was called to the bar in 2009 after completing his articles with a prominent human rights law firm in Toronto. Now, Balpreet possesses a deep-seated commitment to human rights advocacy and has been instrumental in pivotal legal actions supporting multiple faith groups. Balpreet appeared before the Supreme Court of Canada on 3 occasions on behalf of the WSO and helped resolve several key accommodation issues for Sikhs, including the wearing of a kirpan in courthouses in Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, on VIA rail trains, as well as in Canadian embassies and consulates internationally. Balpreet has worked with various public and private sector organizations to create resources and provide training on religious accommodation issues and best practices when interacting with persons of the Sikh faith. He has also served as a director for the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And I'd like you to welcome our esteemed panel. I had the pleasure of chatting with our panel backstage and earlier on this evening, and I know them from their work as well. So that was a very nice opportunity to get to know them a little bit more personally. And I do know that they also hold, strong opinions and perspectives, and that's what we want to hear today. And do feel free to just speak up and jump in without my prompt. And I'm sure we are in for a lively conversation. I'm going to start with a question that may seem very, very broad, but I think if we can all start with this question, it'll help us get into the topics that you would like to be highlighted and spotlighted during this event. And I'll ask you, what are you thinking right now when we say the title of this evening is the state of the Sikh community? So what to you is the state of the Sikh community right now? Sharon?
Oh, I get to start. Wasn't expecting that. I was nervous. I just want to start by saying that it is nerve-wracking being here, even though many of us have been on many different stages. I'll speak for myself. It still is nerve-wracking being here. So, plus I can't see people's faces. So I'll speak into the abyss. It is a big question, and I think each of us are going to bring different answers to that question. And most of those answers are based on our lived experiences. And so for me, where are we at as Sikhs today will kind of localize myself perhaps in British Columbia and maybe even more so where I live on Self-Timok territories in Abbotsford, right, in the Fraser Valley. And I think where I'm feeling where I'm at right now as a Sikh is frustrated, but also hopeful. And so I'm frustrated because I see a lot of harm taking place amongst our own, within our own communities. And, you know, I'm a person who likes to speak from truth. And so whether that be casteist rhetoric, homophobic rhetoric that is based around misogyny, trying to silence women, that is taking place in our communities. And so we'll talk more about the ways that is taking place, but I need for all of us to understand that these are the truths. These are some of the truths that are taking place. So when we're talking about bigger conversations around fighting white supremacy, fighting media stereotypes about us as a Sangha, we also have to underlay that with what are we doing to ourselves as well. But I also have hope. And a lot of the hope that I have is seeing younger Sikhs taking up different spaces. I'm really happy to see Sikh Heritage BC. Those youth are a partner in today's event. I think the work that they are doing is incredible across British Columbia, but not only in that amongst that organization, there are other spaces of Sikh youth doing good work. In Abbotsford, we have the Gurmat Center, and I've been lucky to be a part of that organization for about 7 years, and my boys have been as well. They do seva in the community, they do youth mentorship programming, they're teaching Guru Granth Sahib Ji Santhya. You know, there's hubs of learning taking place. So I always try to balance the negativity that we do need to address amongst our own with a lot of the positivity and the power and the learning and the safe spaces that are being crafted in Sikh spaces. And so I'll start that big question with just kind of putting little teasers of things perhaps that we will address over time today.
Okay, thank you very much. That's off to a good start. And Jindi, what about for you? What comes to mind?
So a lot of what Charlotte has said, I completely agree with. I think my focus has always been a little bit more on external threats or external narratives that come towards us. And, you know, obviously when you say what's the state of the Sikhs, our automatic reaction is to say, we're in Jandi Kala, we're good, we're in high spirits. And that's always going to be there. But the level of disinformation, the level of attacks, especially for Sikhs in Canada, is at an all-time high and very sophisticated. But you know, we have to say Jandi Kala. And I'm constantly reminded of like Nahang Boni, you know, when they were living in the jungles and they were facing a lot of atrocities. If somebody needed to go to the toilet, they'd go, I'm going to go chase away a cheetah. So we have to stay in this kind of sense of Jandi Kala, but be acutely aware. And the other thing I'm constantly reminded, it's on my kind of screen of my phone, it's a Shabad by Gurdas, which is, you know, the English is, you know, to protect an orchard, you have to hedge it with thorns. And sometimes I feel some of us are the thorns to protect the Sikhi because of these external threats that come towards us, and just, you know, having to deal with them openly.
Okay, so looking at internally and externally so far. And what about for you, Rumneek? What goes through your mind when we say, what is the state of the Sikh community right now?
Yeah, for myself, I think I see both urgency, but I also see opportunity. So from a media standpoint, from a collective standpoint, I think there's a clear urgency. And I think the media has now put themselves in a situation where we can't look away, where we can't avoid these conversations. And I think previously the conversations about Sikhs and Sikhi in the media has been fairly monolithic. We will be painted as sevadars, or we painted as extremists. And that's often this kind of dichotomy that we see. And right now, with what's happening, we see the fact that people have to contend with the concept of Khalistan. People have to contend with the real issues that Sikhs are saying they're facing. And then where I see opportunity from a personal perspective, as a young person, as a young Sikh, I think that there's such an opportunity for intergenerational dialogue, learning, teaching. I think that now more than ever, like Mo said in the introduction with the farmers' protests, we see this space for mobilization on a grand scale. We see the ways that we can come together. And I think that there's so much opportunity to bring people into this conversation and to teach, learn, exchange ideas, and to really address the urgency as a collective.
Okay. And more of those connections to be made then. And Balpreet, finally, what goes through your mind? What are you thinking right now and feeling about the state of the Sikh community?
I think that the current situation is unprecedented. I think the challenges that we face are very significant. I'm actually going to talk briefly about 3 huge challenges. The first is the fact that the Canadian Sikh community has been up against the Indian machinery for decades, but it has now come to a head. So something is going to happen. What happens, I don't know. It's going to be, we're going to try our best, but this is a critical time. Something's going to happen. Like things have to change. The status quo is not enough. The second is a critical issue for our community, but sometimes not noticed by folks like myself who are second or third generation. We have a very large international Sikh student population in Canada. And that's been over the past 5 to 7 years. So let's say 150,000, just ballpark figure, between the ages of 18 and 25 largely. And we all know they're here to settle. But the system is not able to settle them all. So in a few years, we're going to have tens of thousands of Sikhs without status. And when they're in that situation, they are prone to all kinds of exploitation. And we're already seeing it. And these are our own children. So the fact that they're leaving Punjab is one issue, but now that they're here, how are we going to create a home for them? So that's the second issue. Bill 21. So Bill 21 is, of course, the Quebec legislation that restricts the wearing of religious symbols by people in positions of authority in Quebec. That legal challenge is ongoing, but if that law is allowed to stand, just like in Quebec, where Sikhs are no longer feeling at home, they can't work as teachers, police officers. When you see populist governments in other provinces take power, in the future you may have a Canada where our Distad is not welcome. So that's a critical legal battle that is ongoing, and I think it will shape the future of our community. So those are the 3 issues that I'm thinking.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. There is so much to unpack there. I think I'll perhaps jump off your first point there, Balpreet, when you said, the situation is unprecedented right now, in that, the community has been up against the machinery in India for decades, but that is coming to a head right now. And obviously we all know about the news from earlier this year. What has been the impact of the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar on the community, and the subsequent declaration by the Prime Minister that there's credible evidence that India played a role in that? What has been the impact on the community?
I think the sad part is that this wasn't news to our community, but it was news to the Canadian mainstream. So when we were talking about these things, we were up against this notion that these guys, they're making up conspiracy theories. There's no way this is happening in Canada. And the fact is, for decades, Canada has allowed India to do its operations against the Canadian Sikh community. And it's been basically at the altar of economic growth and diplomacy. So it was just the Sikhs that are suffering. It's okay. No one's going to believe them anyways, and, they'll deal with it. But for the first time, the mainstream is hearing about this and the extent of it. Like, people are asking me, so, this has been happening for decades? Like, what evidence do you have this happening for decades? There's books written about it. The Indian intelligence officers that were actually stationed here went back and they wrote books, and you can order them online. You can read all about it. But this is now an international embarrassment for India. I don't think India expected this to happen. They thought they were the rising hegemony, and getting shamed like this is probably too much for them to bear. But they've got this super active IT cell, and they're super juvenile as well. They're very immature. Like, their reactions to any issues are just, they're imbecilic. So, for example, what you're seeing now, restricting visas, when you're seeing them telling Canadian diplomats to get out, when they're threatening when they're claiming there was a grenade attack at the Ottawa embassy. Like, the problem here is the mainstream are just like, no, a country couldn't be that ridiculous, but they are that ridiculous. So I think this is the time for us to get our story out there. But for the first time, maybe the Canadian government's going to help out. Maybe the Canadian authorities are going to actually step in, because the Indian operations against our community go very deep. And we all know this, but the mainstream doesn't. So stop.
Well, then let me follow up there with a question to Rumneek on that. Where have been the gaps, or what have been the failures or the oversights of mainstream media in terms of covering those machinations over the years?
Yeah, I think that, like Balpreet said, the Sikh community was talking about this back in June when the assassination happened. There was this knowing on a deep level, both inside of us, but also as a collective information sharing, and just knowing that there was ties to India. And I think that it wasn't until now that the rest of the media caught up. There were a few articles where I know the Toronto Star did some reporting interviewing former CSIS directors who said similar things, that CSIS had been tracking India for some time, but they don't get as much attention as, for example, China or Russia when it comes to foreign interference. And we are aware that there are, like Balpreet said as well, this targeting of Sikhs. But I think after the assassination, I think it really created a situation where the media, again, couldn't not address this issue, because there is a general avoidance of the topic of Khalistan in Canadian mainstream media. I think any story in which Khalistan will be invoked is generally avoided, from what I've noticed. And I think that just even the explaining of the why and with a nuanced perspective is definitely lacking. So I think this critical time created an environment where the mainstream media in Canada finally had to delve into those conversations and to delve into the why the Sikh community is having these conversations, particularly at a time like this.
Now, Jindi, you talked about external forces. Do you see that as mainstream media, as politicians or government that have not paid enough attention to these issues?
I certainly don't think they paid enough attention. I think, unfortunately, the Sikh community within Canada has been a guinea pig for how our intelligence services are failing us as Canadians. The fact that people were on a hit list, and it was very openly known in the community, and all that we saw was, some law enforcement official knock on the door and say, "You're on a hit list, good luck." That's not enough. We also need, a lot more engagement between law enforcement, intelligence services with the Sikh community, sharing of ideas, of concerns, of threats. That clearly hadn't been there in the past. So that certainly concerns me a lot. That, it's not a disinformation thing, but we have become the guinea pigs. I mean, right now with the Israel-Hamas situation, there's a lot of talk about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. We're seeing the police forces outside kind of masjids and synagogues. But when we were openly talking about, these hit lists and these concerns, where was the police presence? Where were they? What were they doing? How can someone so kind of brazenly do this and get away with it? So I think we've unfortunately been the guinea pigs for Canada to show where the weaknesses are in our Canadian institutions.
And Sean, for you, what's your reaction? I'll just leave it open. And you talked about, within the community, the dynamics there. What is the impact within the community from what happened and the allegations about India's role?
Well, I think one thing I think I also want to highlight is the power of white nostalgia and the urgency of the things that we are talking about. Rhetoric around the Sikh community as, quote, terrorists or sevadars, like Rumneek very aptly said, have existed for decades in this country. The power of white nostalgia and like colonial institutions is that we forget so easily, right? And so, we need cohesion as a Sikh Sangat and a Sikh community to really understand what is it that we are trying to fight and what are the histories of what has always been said about us. And I struggle with people in my own community who not dilute the message, but completely screw up the analysis. Like, honestly, it's so frustrating when there are people who have a lot of power and platforms who are given platforms problematically, and they speak not from a place of empathy, of like actual understanding of what we are going through as Sikhs. And so that's also happening within our community. So where do we find the cohesion to constantly combat the nostalgia that's going to happen? Like, it's already happened. People aren't talking as much about Bain and Jindi Singh passing away. And this incredible announcement by the Prime Minister saying there has been an assassination of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. Like, this should be an ongoing kind of memory conversation, but it's not.
So where does that cohesion come from? I'm going to open up the floor to everybody and feel free to just share your thoughts. Where does that cohesion come from? Where should it come from?
Please don't finish your thought. Please don't finish your thought.
I'm sorry, they're not shy.
I mean, cohesion within the community. I mean, we have to make a lot of effort and do make a lot of effort with, different groups, with different activities, trying to be together. Sometimes it's reactionary. When something awful happens, we all get together and deal with it. But during quieter times, which right now we don't have quieter times, but during quieter times, like every other community, we drift apart and go back into our silos. But we need to continually remember that there is, pressure being put on us by nation states like India, and even where here, we have issues around racism and other issues. And then going back to what Sharon said, I kind of laugh that either we're the model minority or we're monsters. It's like one or the other. We could never be both. Even as I said, right now, for example, we're doing a winter drive. We're giving out clothing and other items to either international students or to youth groups across the country focusing on vulnerable youth. And really, we, as an aid organization, we want to project the story that we're doing this in memory of Mahatma Gujari and the Jal Sahibzade, which, the young sons of Guru Gobind Singh who were martyred. Try getting that through the media. Every time they come and they want to report, and that's great. Right now, they're focusing on the international students, and they're focusing on their plight and how aid groups like ours are helping them. But for us, there's a deeper message about vulnerable youth, about, suffering as a child during winter, and especially now with what we're seeing happening in Gaza. It brings that story much more back to your mind, but try getting that through to the mainstream media. It's extremely difficult.
Yes, please.
Sorry, because I know Michelle's ready to ask another question. I quickly want to jump in with a point as well. Cohesion can also be found in the spaces that we as Sikhs hold professionally. So we've got incredible professionals here on this stage. I have the privilege to be a historian teaching at UFE and UBC. So as an example, I brought Mo into my class to give a guest, chat about Poetic Justice Foundation and the farmers' protest. Nobody in my class at UBC had ever heard of the farmers' protest or what had happened or the campaign against Poetic Justice Foundation, Khalistan, Sikhs, none of that, right? I know it may not sound impactful, but that has impact. And we are so privileged to have these positions professionally. I certainly feel we should leverage that and speak out and speak our truths and our identities and our histories when we are given those positions.
So we wanted to know about Khalistan. The fact is, Khalistan has been so vilified, almost made a taboo by Indian propaganda, that even in our own community, we've been very reluctant to talk about it. But what's wrong with it? Like, when I spoke to him, I almost felt, it makes so much sense. Why haven't we talked more about it? So until 1849, we had our own Raj, we had a sovereign rule. For 98 years, the British annexed the Punjab, and when they leave, they split it into two parts and create these entities of Pakistan and India, leaving us with nothing. And we, as the largest religious community in the world without a homeland, it kind of makes sense that we'd want to talk about a country. But having these conversations is difficult. Not all reporters have an hour of time, and understanding the context of everything, that's super important. So we have to be willing to tell our story, but on the other side, we have to find reporters who are willing to listen to it as well, and not just want the 10-minute news bite and get it over with.
Rumneek, what is your what I don't want to ask what is your advice, but your comments on that, the efforts that need to be made by journalists.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'm in a unique position because I have the time and resources to take my time with telling stories. But I know that in many cases in Canadian mainstream media, there is this, and Mo talked about it earlier, this laziness when it comes to covering either certain stories or a lack of time in covering things with nuance. But what I noticed even with this story in June by Jindi Singh, there's this rush to be first and to get the scoop, and I think that is extremely harmful. I think there's also been a historic gaslighting of Sikhs in many ways, and I think that there's an understandable distrust of the media. I think what needs to happen is for more Sikh voices to be platformed in these spaces in order to create that environment of trust. So we saw, all white panels talking about this on different networks, and I think that, of course, we aren't going to feel trusting towards these people, but Sikh voices are necessarily platformed in the media, and sometimes we're kind of our perspectives or these conversations about Khalistan are almost brushed off as conspiracy theories, especially when back in June, that was something that was kind of floating around. And so to be vindicated on such a large scale, but to feel, again, gaslit, it's frustrating for a community. So I can see it from both perspectives. But yeah, I think there needs to be a more concerted effort on the part of newsrooms to give that agency to reporters to be able to tell the full story.
Jindi, Sean?
You want to go first?
You go.
I'm going to jump in.
You go first.
I saw this really, it was a panel, I think it was CTV, was Tom Mulcair, John Tory, and Christy Clark. And they were being asked about the whole situation with India. And I was so disappointed. So disappointed. So Christy Clark, I'm going to use your one. So Christy Clark and Tom Mulcair are both going on about how this is such a disaster. It's Trudeau has embarrassed himself, and India, we have to think about rebuilding the ties. And at least, John Tory, the former mayor of Toronto, said, if these are accusations that are true, then, this is probably a bad position for Canada to take. So sort of a balanced sort of a position. But think about this. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to. Imagine a Jewish rabbi killed in the parking lot of a synagogue by Iran. Do you think that we would be, well, how are we going to rebuild ties with Iran after this? You wouldn't imagine. I mean, every single political leader would have been at that synagogue speaking and condemning. I'm not aware of. Jagmeet Singh went. The Prime Minister certainly hasn't. Pierre Poilievre certainly hasn't.
Yeah.
But we're talking about how are we going to rebuild ties with India now? This is ridiculous. So these white politicians, commentators, they still don't. How are we going to change that? I don't know. Neek?
I actually have the solution for me. No, I'm just kidding. But the other thing we're seeing is a huge fraction of our Sikh community taking on heavy conservative leanings too, right? So the how we're going to fight it is so complicated because there's a lot of team Poilievre.
Yeah, but
Yes, a lot of team him. And first he responded by saying the assassination was wrong, and then he did a complete 360 the next day. And it makes me wonder, because in Abbotsford, there's tons of, like, he's coming to Sikh people's houses, and they're all flaunting him on Facebook. And it makes me wonder, like, where do we draw our line in terms of our own values and our ethics and our integrity to say, is this man going to be, like, what is he going to do for me? Help my small business? And what is that going to be in the bigger picture in terms of what is he speaking out about against the Indian state and what's happened? And so we're seeing a lot of conservative-leaning Sikhs siding with him. So I'm having a difficult time struggling with how they align with him, and then what is their response to how he is now silent in terms of the Indian state's role and done a complete 360. So that's also taking place in our community as well. And again, I don't have an answer to it, but we need to know it exists. Huge pocket of conservative Sikhs as well.
Yeah, I mean, Khalsa Aid works across the country, so a lot of our chapters have very different political views. So from my role, I just stay apolitical about it, but it is interesting that the Niger murder was politicized at this kind of federal level, which had really nothing to do with it. Well, why did Trudeau do this? Did he do it for a Sikh vote? And not realizing that he did it because the newspaper were going to come out with a story that week. And then people say, well, where's the evidence? Well, do you not believe the Five Eyes? Do you not believe the intelligence that's coming from the US and the UK? And over time, they've basically stood their ground and said we stick with Canada on this. And it's got politicized because, I'm Andrew Trudeau, he said it. So, be a bit more sensible about this. Vote for who you want to, but be sensible that this is an issue for us as a quorum. It's not a Liberal versus Conservative versus NDP issue. It's an issue for us, and we need to consistently remind people that a Canadian citizen was assassinated on Canadian soil and our Canadian institutions failed us. That's what we need to be talking about as Sikhs, not why did Trudeau say it, why hasn't he come up with the evidence?
Yeah. I did want to ask one more question about that because Rumneek, and then we can have our audience. I did hear, I think people are eager to participate, so let's do that. But I wanted to touch on a point that Rumneek brought up, which is that now there's a real urgency and people are having to contend with the concept of Khalistan, and that there have been these representations in media that have sort of led to a community that has been reticent to do so. Where are we now on that then? What needs to happen to be able to contend with that, to have proper representation of the issue and to have cohesion in the community?
Yeah, I think, well, from a media perspective, I think the onus isn't on our community. It's again on the media. So if the media is listening, but I think there's a need to build these relationships to be able to give a voice to the why behind why is the community invoking the concept of Khalistan when it comes to any issue that's tied to our oppression or marginalization. That is the central conversation that comes up when Khalistan is brought up in many of these issues. And I think that also means the onus is on the media to debunk some of this misinformation, because I think, again, we've used comparisons to other communities, but if there was this concerted targeting of any community in Canada, and this rampant misinformation or disinformation that's targeting this community, there would be an effort and a responsibility on behalf of the media to address that. And so I think we're just in a time where, again, the media can't avoid talking about it any longer, but that also means building relationships with Sikh communities in order to just not just drop in, like Balpreet said, and take the story, but to understand the broader context behind this current moment in history right now, and to tell it fully.
And just moving away from media, like academia has a role to play in this as well, right? Like there are so few, I think, Sikh academics and scholars here in BC teaching history, anthropology, sociology, those kind of social sciences, humanities courses where the conversation of Khalistan can even come up. And frankly, there's so much racism, and white women gatekeep so much of like our access to our own ability to tell our own histories and stories, that it also does a huge disservice to the conversation of Khalistan, right? I want to be able to say it, analyze it, speak to the history of it, do comparatives globally to the movement and what sovereignty means. But the fact that, nobody is doing that as a bit of inertia within academia means that there's whole gaps within our educational system where young people aren't learning about global sovereignty movements, pros, cons, histories, whatever it is. And so academia is totally lack in being able to even share these histories and stories.
Well, great, Jindi?
I think I'd add to that is we are, one thing that I'm constantly concerned about is the oral history aspect of this, that, we have many people, I think the statistics is about 70% of the Sikh population in Canada has come from India or have come from abroad. So they still outnumber those who were born here. And there were many who came here in the 80s and 90s on political asylum. They have many stories. They're all getting much older now. And their stories about their struggles, about the violence they faced in India and then having to come here and restart their lives and rebuild their lives and carrying that trauma with them is something that our academic institutions have missed out on. We've gone back to, doing an excellent job of looking at, the pioneers, the ones who came here initially. We've looked at labor movements. And then after like the 60s and 70s, there doesn't seem to be a lot of research of what was happening to a community. And one of the issues that worries me, and it's an issue that many of us have thought about, is, if you went back to the 1900s, whether you were Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, you were all Hindu. That's how the media described you. Then it was East Indian, and then for a little bit it was Indo-Canadian, and now it's South Asian. And I think with, the province trying to make a museum and a whole host of other things.
To bring the museum up, Jindi.
Anyway, we were at it. I'm trying to say the audience a question I've been asked to solve that issue right now. But, it's an erosion of our history because up until the 60s, there was only a few thousand people here, and they were predominantly Punjabi Sikhs who suffered so much abuse, racism, and God knows what else. And now we're saying, well, we're uncomfortable with the term Sikh or Punjabi, and what they've put up with, we want to call it South Asian. And, my argument is, what does someone in the foothills of Afghanistan have to do with someone in the Maldives? It's South Asia is a geography. It's not a culture. And I understand it's all about political correctness, but my concern is it will erase now the history of the Punjabi Sikhs who came here, how they toiled, what they did. We're now heading towards Remembrance Day, and many of the Punjabi Sikh men who were here, and the women weren't here, obviously, until much later, went back to the Punjab to enlist because here the Canadians didn't want them to enlist during World War One. And in fact, when you're digging up the history, Sikh soldiers were parading along Granville they're all former soldiers and, doing drills and trying to convince the government here to let them enlist. And they refused, so many of them left. So that's just one little struggle amongst many that they put up with. You go back to your properties and you'll see, basically saying if you're East Indian or Black, you're not allowed to live in these areas. The area I lived in has that, it was illegally from before.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jindi. That actually touches on something that I wanted to talk about, which is our community needs to think about this, that either we will define ourselves and define our terms, or others will define them for us. So South Asian, I agree with you 100%. South Asian, like if I wanted to, how would I say South Asian in Punjabi? Yes, I don't think there's a word for South Asian. So this is a term that's been used to define me that I haven't come up with. It doesn't come from where my culture, my faith doesn't come from that. And I agree. I think it's a racist term. I think it erases my identity. And I agree with everything you've said. But there's a number of other terms. So turban. Even if you look at the WSO's website, I'll admit we have that term there. But I mean, turban can be like the turban that fashion women wear for fashion or after you come out of a shower. The dissect is something that is very much different. Sikh symbols, articles of faith. Well, we have kakars. There's something different. A gurdwara is not a temple. If we call it a temple, you give it a different meaning. And what I'm afraid of, even for example, Sikh Khalsa Day parade, Sikh parade, it's a Nagar Kirtan. When we don't define these terms ourselves, what I'm afraid of is that they're going to be defined by the outside, and then we pass them on to the next generation. Then we know what we're talking about when we're talking about a Sikh parade or we're talking about a Sikh temple. We understand Gurdwara. But when those terms are going to be informed by the outside and we pass them on to the next generation, that generation is not going to have that same knowledge, and we're going to lose meaning. Khalistan is probably the biggest one that India wants us to be afraid to define. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, I am so proud when I talk about Khalistan. Like, I was the reporter yesterday. I was saying, what I'm telling you sounds too good to be true, but it's actually true. Like Sri Hargobindpur, a town established by Sri Guru Hargobind Sahib, he actually builds a mosque for his Muslim residents. He builds several mandirs for the Hindu residents. So freedom of religion, diversity, all these things are not foreign to us. They are a critical part of how we've been raised. This is who we are. But India wants to define this as a theocracy, kind of like Iran, kind of scary, ethnic cleansing. And it's so false. And they've scared us so much that we're afraid to talk about these things. And if we leave, in Punjabi, Madan Jhartana, if we leave the field for the Indians or others to define, then we're going to lose meaning, and it's going to hurt us. So definition is super important.
Definition is super important. External factors, as Jindi was saying. I have so many other questions, but I know that you do too. So let's open up the floor to our audience. And please do feel free to engage and ask questions of our panelists. You can come up to this microphone right here. I would just ask you to have questions that you would like to pose, and if you could be succinct, just so that more people have the opportunity to do so. So please do feel free. And if you want to pose your question to a specific panelist, please do so as well. Yes, sir?
Sure. This is in regard to a comment Balpreet Singh made, and allowed to maybe expand on it. It talks about Khalistan, and I think he made a good point. A lot of people don't realize, and even in the community, when you talk about partition of India, this is a term that we use, partition of India. Well, there was no partition of India. And I would like Balpreet to maybe comment more on that. There was only one area that was divided, and that was Punjab. It was split in half. No other India was touched. There was no partition of India, only Punjab. Punjab was divided. And when you sort of ask, well, why is it that Punjabis raise this issue? Because they're the only ones who lost their own land. No part of India was divided. There was no partition anywhere in India, only Punjab. And the world doesn't know that. I think the Sikhs miss that too. But Balpreet, if you could maybe spread some, put more light on that particular issue. And they had their own Raj, they had their own currency. He gave an example of one of the gurus, but Maharaj Jindi Singh, under his Raj, how did he run his Raj? and the people he had, in his armed forces. I'll leave it for Balpreet Singh. Thank you.
No, I agree with you, of course. Punjab was the main place where partition took place. So India wasn't partitioned, Punjab was partitioned. Of course, Bengal on the other side, but partition was very different from Bengal. And imagine the sovereign people who within 98 years went from sovereigns to not having any place to go. And in fact, losing more than half of what their homeland was. We self-censor so much. We've got that fear inside us, and we don't even realize what has happened to us. And when we talk about it, it's actually quite liberating. But we don't talk about it enough. And like I said, when I'm talking about it, like for example, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's rule, it seems too good to be true. The concepts that liberal democracies are starting to celebrate today, this is who we've been brought up as. So once again, I just really do think that we need to be able to tell our own stories and stop being afraid. And that fear does go very deep. And India banks on that fear. And the media don't understand that fear. So that narrative, which is actually really even pushed by the CBC, by others, which is that Khalistan is a question for the diaspora and it might be strong here. And until these Khalistan referendums took place, they wouldn't even admit that it was strong here. It was just Khalistani showing up to Nagar Kirtans and trying to co-opt those gatherings to show strength. But when you have at least 300,000 Sikhs that have shown up to these non-binding referendums, specifically for Khalistan, you can't ignore that. But now they're saying no. In India, they're not really talking about that. The fact of the matter is, the Canadian Sikh population, the majority of them are born outside of Canada. So there's no generational gap here. That we are stuck in an old generation and Punjab is a new generation. They're afraid. If they can kill a Khalistan activist in Canada, what do you think they can do in India? And it's not what do you think they can do in India. We lived through that in the 90s. Tens of thousands of Sikhs were disappeared. Their families were eliminated. So there's just so much to talk about here, but we've got to start talking about it and stop being afraid. And I'll say this, what's the worst that can happen? You won't get a visa? Sikhs used to sacrifice their lives. This is the least I can do. And I would just encourage all of you to just think where you came from. We didn't come together as a Panth because we were timid. We celebrate fearlessness. And this is the least sacrifice we can make.
I just wanted to jump in real quick, if that's okay. We talked on a call before this, and one of the things that we came up was the concept of fear and how there is sometimes an avoidance of talking about these things openly. And for myself, as even a reporter covering these issues, I've had family members express their concern and their fear for me speaking about these things. And I think we need to push back on that because there's so many histories that we don't talk about openly, whether it is fear, whether it is trauma. These conversations aren't happening in our homes. And I think, or at least my homes, and for many, that these are topics that are avoided. And I think that this is something that what you spoke to is this fearlessness of confronting this. And when you push back, or when I push back, there is that realization that we have a right to have these conversations. We have a right to unpack our histories and our shared histories intergenerationally. And so I think, that fear is and has been extremely powerful, but I think that there's hopefully some room to interrogate that fear in our own lives and our own families and our own histories.
Can I just make a dorky historical comment as the historian here? I think we also need to be critical when learning our own histories a little bit. So, many people dispute the idea that Maharaja Ranjit Singh was creating a Sikh empire. And I'm still learning more about it. I did my master's degree on Ranjit Singh and the Nihangs, actually. And, Ranjit Singh was a very flawed character, a flawed historical figure. For me as a Sikh, I'm more attached to the story of Balpreet Singh, right? Somebody who was taken, forced to convert to Christianity, found his Sikhi. To me, that's the story that I would want to teach my children in terms of, did you know this is our history as well? Did you know that there was forced conversion, colonialism, stealing of a child, stealing of the Kohinoor, which is fraught as well, all these layered stories. So we have the gift of intelligence. We are, we're Sikh. Don't just talk very superlatively about Maharaja Ranjit Singh and just say, oh, that was our Sikh empire. Like, be historical about it and say, well, what does that look like? And what's the story of the Leap Singh, perhaps? And maybe we can draw our intimate connections to the Leap Singh. So just a dorky historical kind of interjection there to say, equip ourselves a little bit more too.
Yeah, I think, I'm just adding to that, I think increasingly I agree with a lot of what you're saying about Ranjit Singh. We don't want to give this kind of romanticized view, but increasingly seeing what's happening around us now, and even issues around Khalistan and what does it mean, increasingly you wonder whether it means we do need a space, a safe haven where we can go, and it's our own community protecting us. They're the nation state. Sometimes, I'm sure WSO gets this, sometimes Khalsa Aid gets these questions from people, especially those in India who are suffering for a whole host of different reasons. And those questions, they're really asking us as if we're a government. I thought, we're not a government. You need to go to your elected officials if you're having issues in your village and so on. And I think over there they've been bashed so much, it's really low expectations for them now. And then when you look back at the Ranjit Singh period, you kind of think at least there was a safe haven on the whole and some progress. And in fact, when the British and the Sikhs met during the Anglo-Sikh Wars, it was really that of equals as far as militaristically they were concerned, that they were able to really fend the British off for as long as they could. So those are important things to remember. I think the other thing about Ranjit thing I've been thinking recently is when we talk about him, we always talk about him in relation to the rest of India, whereas he was this kind of buffer zone as far as the Great Game, as it's often called. And he also had a lot of foreign relations, going west, talking to Russians and others. And I think as Sikhs, that's something we need to explore more and understand that this was a world power in essence. And it wasn't just another kingdom within the Indian subcontinent. It was also, Ranjit Singh was well aware of what was happening, with the Ottomans and the Russian expansion and so on, and protecting himself and being aware of what was going on that side. Then you have to don't think about that. We think more of just the relations to the British, because ultimately the British did colonize Punjab. So that's just another thing to think about as well.
I love how you went on a tangent. What kind of that always? No good.
Yes, go ahead. Hi, guys. Thank you for the great conversation. So I want to just spin things and talk about decolonizing healthcare and how we make it patient-centric. The emergency department at Surrey Memorial is named after Guru Nanak, yet as a healthcare worker, we're not patient-centric. The Healthcare Act was written in 1984, 40 years. So, maybe you guys can shed some light comments, but our people are broken or people are hurt. And those generations that are fading away, it's showing up through mental health, trauma, chronic diseases, and we need to do better. Thank you very much.
Great question. I've been dealing with this issue for years. I'll tell you a story. This was actually, it was definitely the Fraser Health Network. I don't remember which hospital it was. There was a Sikh couple, an Amritdhari Sikh couple. They had a baby, and the baby had some issues, and they were then presented with a card, congratulations on baby's first haircut, and it had some clippings of the baby's hair. So this is, of course, unimaginable. It's trauma on top of trauma. The baby recovered, luckily, but they approached the WSO to do a human rights complaint. And I remember in mediation, so we settled it. I can't talk about what we settled it for, but I remember the lawyer said to me, Fraser Health's lawyer, when I talked, this is how it started. I said, our community is very well represented and we fund the hospital very well. We generously donate and, we have things named after the Sikh faith. So it would make sense that your staff would know about the Sikh community. And the answer she gave me was actually shocking. She said, oh, so you think you can buy better care? Is that what you think your community can do? And I was just shocked. I said, that's not what I'm saying. Well, you think that they should know about the Sikh community? Why not the Buddhists? Why not the Jains? Well, the answer is, sure, do them as well. But given the proportion of the population, it makes sense that you would educate them about the Sikh faith. And I've seen this over and over again. So in Brampton, the Brampton Hospital, same thing. They have the emergency room named after Guru Nanak.
Yeah.
When we had incidents there where Sikh patients were not treated with the understanding and compassion that they deserve. For example, there was a COVID patient. He was taken into the ICU, which is isolated. The family said they're not giving him, we want him to have his kakars, and they're not understanding. So I called the head nurse and I said, the articles of faith, so once again, I'm using their language, articles of faith need to be with him. She goes, well, we have lots of religions and lots of articles of faith, so we'll put them around the room the best we can. But, we're in an emergency right now. I go, wait, the articles of faith, the kakars, have to be on his person. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, are you making my life, we can't do this for every person. There was a complete lack of understanding. And what I feel sometimes is that our community is very generous in giving literally millions, but the hospitals as an administrative function don't really care to learn about the population they're serving and are very confrontational. So that's my experience.
Eric, anything else?
I think I'm not from here, but from what I noticed during the COVID period, both in Ontario and here, was the inequity in how things were being provided, where pop-up clinics were happening. And especially during COVID, this kind of initial this community won't understand things, and that kind of narrative that gets pushed out there. And even now with lots of talk about a hospital, it seems like in Surrey, people just have to exhaust themselves demanding better healthcare. And, I'm not sure if it was with Nujasab or with other incidents, it takes the ambulance ages to get to the scene because they're sometimes coming from other areas. And in Ontario, it's still, at least in the GTA and in Brampton, it seems to be very similar, that areas with a higher proportion of visible minorities don't always get the funding. And you do wonder why. I think if the community demanded it, they would get it. I think one person gave me an anecdotal kind of reason is, well, my parents came from India, the healthcare there was god-awful, but they're just happy there's an ER they can go to. But I think the next generation of someone needs to demand more, and we don't always realise, that if you're living in Vancouver, you've got much better healthcare. If you're living in Surrey, not so much. So that inequity certainly needs to be dealt with.
And I also think being strategic as a Sangat is really important. I absolutely agree. We do give millions and we name hospital wards after the founder of our Sikh faith. But what do we do after that? Like, do we demand that we're on the board? Do we take part in committees? Of course, that's a privileged language to even know that, you can do that. But how do we enter these conversations as a community when we're doing these radiothons and fundraisers and raising millions? What happens after that? There's so much bravado when the politicians come out, when it's being done, but I don't see the strategy afterwards. And I think part of that is what needs to change within the hospital and healthcare structures is that we are embedded within those processes once we hand in that check and then ward is named after whoever we choose to name it after. So a little bit of strategic thinking is needed. And again, we have people who are Sikh working in these incredible health spaces who I think can help craft that conversation for sure.
What they said. The way forward. Thank you very much for your questions. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay, except you may ask the audience, may I speak in Punjabi?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think there only one person who understands English, that's all people are speaking in Punjabi. It's very sablu sasrikal. मैं नवा स्टूडेंट है मेरी डॉटर ने क्या भी तू जरूर जाना मैं ऑर्डर नहीं मांगता सी मैंने थोड़ा सैशन में कोई थोड़ी सस्ती करनी जे थोड़े को बोल मेरा गंदा लगे हो बह जाओ बात से मैं चुप करके चल जाना नो वायलेंट एक्ट आई विल बी वेरी पीसफुल एंड थैंकफुल मैंने थोड़ी बिल्कुल समझ नहीं लगी मैंने ऑनेस्टली मैंने ये नहीं पता थोड़ा खालिस्तान हवा च ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਇੰਡੀਆ 'ਚ ਸਰੀ ਆ ਐਬਸਪੋਰਟ 'ਚ ਖਾ ਪੜੀ ਵੀ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਮੈਂ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਬੋਲੇ ਮੈਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀ What if we do call it being poor? It was a pagale on here, Daria on here, Baki caste nahi honing. What's this? Minta patal nahi lagdi. Mainu bilkul nahi saadi lagi todi yaar. Mainu ya baar kar I'm very bad student. Je main ban gaya to best student bhi hounga. I will guarantee about that. Par mainu todi koi samjh nahi lagi. Koi sehed nahi, koi clarity of mind nahi. Koi idhar tabla shad diya, koi idhar set diya, koi idhar. No, thoroughly, nothing. Confused. I am not confused. You made me more confused. There's no clarity. I challenge you, you have no clarity at all.
ਚਲੋ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ
Thank you.
ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਮਾਫ ਕਰਨਾ ਇਹ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦਾ ਹੀ ਸੀ ਬਟ ਚਲੋ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੰਟੈਂਟ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਜੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਉਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਪਰ ਇਹ ਫੋਰਮ ਉਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ ਖੈਰ ਲੈਟਸ ਮੂਵ ਫੋਰਵਰਡ
Yeah, Balpreet said it was great. Yeah, we can go on to the next question.
Go ahead. My name is Gurnaam Singh. So the Punjabi बोलते हैं कि अंग्रेजी जो तुसी बात में तो ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਸਮਝ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਆਈ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਤੇ ਕਨਫਿਊਜ਼ਡ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੋਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਤੇ ਤੇਰਾ ਨਾਂਦਾ ਦੇ ਕੀ ਗਿਆ
See, that these bits to be does it around.
I'm a bit blunt person. I know a bit of history, Sharanjit wrote of the Dolby. What I'm saying is, I agree with talking, but I'll take only one point. Khalistan. Related to what sort of Khalistan? I'll ask his grandchildren or the children, they should read Ancient Education in Ranjit Singh's time by Latimer. It's 540 pages book. Read it, ask somebody to read it, then you will know that in his time, one India's rupee was equal to 13 pounds, not dollars, pounds. So you need to have that, and we need Khalistan of that type. And we are not asking Khalistan. What Balpreet has said, really we need to give a, I'm not going to ask the question, I'm going to give my own lecture. We need to have our own narrative. They are defining us through their own narratives. And all of them have got their own agendas. And I know many of our own people who are opposing Trudeau, and they call me daily that he's a stupid man. Why are you writing? I'm also a bit of writer. I write in newspapers. Okay. So I need to define that we are Sikhs. Sikh or what? Of Gurbani. Not of any person. Secondly, we must define what sort of Khalistan is of Ranjit Singh. Secondly, I'll say, when India was going to be divided, I'll say India because it's generally popular term. It's mostly Punjab and Bengal. And if we coin our own term, like Ranjit Singh, we were asked during that time, I know all the proceedings, I've read it, about the constitution and also how the dialogue took place between the British government and when we can say 3 representatives were in London. Anyway, they tried to provide, but we failed. And I'm going to write about those who were the traitors in our panth as well. But anyway, I'm not going in that. So first, we should counter that we need Khalistan as was of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, or basically that Guru Nanak Sahib did it in Kartarpur. That was our model. And on the other hand, also Anandapur Sahib, where Guru Gobind Singh Ji ne Khalsa Sadhya, oh, that was also another model which sometimes people get, I was discussing with a friend of mine, that is sort of Vatican. But it's not a Vatican, just we say, yeah, I agree that it was our own self-created, independent state. Anandapur was independent. All of people, you should know, Anandpur land was bought by Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. It was established there. So we need to have that Kartarpur model. So I finish in a couple of minutes. The problem at present is, which we are really so discouraged, so intimidated, are shocked that some of our Amritaris in India have gone back to BJP. They have deserted our Panth. They should not call themselves Amritari. What I am seeing is, people, majority of them, they are scared of the Indian government here, sitting here 40,000 miles away. And I asked them, why are you scared? And they called me, don't you want to go back to the university there? I said, no, I'll fight. So thirdly, we need, as Balpreet has pointed out, Sharanjit, you have said as well, that as academicians, we should be organic intellectuals. Organic means we are not just as the Sarkar as we will be with them. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੋਈ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਤੁਰਾਮ ਕੋਰੇ ਮੋਰ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ take the stand and be there. So we must fight. If anybody wants to know what's organic, then it's a Gramsci who suffered all his life in the jail of Mussolini in Italy. So we need to be standing up for our own rights and fight against, there's a disinformation, not misinformation. Indian government is doing disinformation. That's their narrative. And lastly, I'll say, even Joe Clark stated at that time, possibly all of you will know, he issued an instructions that we people, leaders of Canada, should not go to the meetings to address the Khalistanis. This is where we stood. So we need to stand up and we should attack the real cause, not their symptoms. Cause is, real base is Indian government interfering openly in our elections here.
Okay.
And also in other countries as well.
Thank you very much.
And sorry for that.
That's okay, thank you.
But there, I want to make the point, we should be just bypassing those issues. So thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Did anybody want to comment on that before we go on to our next caller?
So I'm just going to use some license here as one of the producers of this event. We should have said this at the outset, but at the questions, please try to limit them 90 seconds, 2 minutes maximum, because there's a lot of people here. So it's Sanja Thaya. And as a Sanja Thaya, we want to make sure that we all share in the time that we have. Right? And the other part is, I apologize, but this program is in English. Punjabi da bhi karange, right? Tusi sadi saath de ho, te assi Punjabi da bhi karange, but today's program is in English.
Do we have someone who would like to come up now? Thank you so much. Go ahead, sir.
So one of the topics that was brought up was about internal divide. And I think the question I have for you guys is, how would you guys define Panthik Ekta? Because a lot of times when we talk about this topic, we think about uniformity. And I think there's a lot of diversity within unity. And also a big thing is that when we're talking and we have talks about in relation to our community, there's a lot of disagreements and there's no respect among each other to move forward on the wider issues, yet respecting the smaller, minuscule disagreements that we may have. So how would you guys maybe go about looking at it from a lens?
Actually, I think it's a very valid and important point you're raising. Different groups do different things. And if we feel panthically that this other group is sincere, they're doing something completely different from what we're doing, or they're doing it in a different manner, we should still be supporting them. It's when they're doing things that feels like they're trying to derail, then we need to be a bit upfront. I actually, it's not the ekta that worries me, it's the silence that worries me. When people make daft videos and put them online, we're not saying this is not us. So that worries me. I do jokingly say sometimes when people ask me about ekta, is there wasn't one missile, there were 12, So and that's not to say, we're split up or whatever like that, but there will always be many organizations, many groups, and we do have to support each other. I think it's extremely, extremely important. Now, often people will come to me and say, for example, oh, so-and-so started a similar group just like yours. How do you feel? And I'm like, I don't feel anything. I feel great. That just means more people are getting aid, more people are being assisted. It doesn't matter to me who they're doing, as long as they're doing it sincerely. That's what matters. I think for us as a bunch, we do have to have a bit more of a critical lens, but support each other all the time. So those are kind of my thoughts on that.
I can also speak to it, since I sort of spoke about the internal kind of things that we all struggle with as a Sikh Sangat. I feel like there are pockets of hate being formed, and there's a lateral violence that is taking place when we look at misogyny, casteism, and I said this in my little spiel around what this event means to me. Misogyny, right? It is one thing to speak to each other from a place of shared power. So if I'm speaking to somebody and Jindi and I, we disagree, I'm pretty sure, once in a while. Yeah, if we disagree, we still come to a place where we share the same power in the same space, and we give each other a chance to speak. What I am just so hurt by is sheer hate. So if we look at, again, Abbotsford, I'm going to plug in Abbotsford. There's been a lot of homophobia, transphobia taking place in the community. And as an example, this is what somebody told me. A 70-year-old woman was simply holding up a sign saying, I'm here for inclusive spaces. I'm here to make everybody feel like we are one and we are safe. She was physically attacked by another Sikh for simply holding that sign. Physically attacked. 70-year-old woman. And it's, for me, I don't know where to place this. I don't know where to place this sheer level of lateral violence. And also the sheer level of lateral violence where we take out our phone and record each other and make little clips and spread it on WhatsApp and say, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to completely hate on this person. What are we doing? Is there not a way that we can have a conversation that is crafted around safety? Safety based on gender, safety based on caste, safety based on whatever. And then let's talk from a Sikh perspective, right? What does it mean from a Sikh perspective to speak our truths? I don't have an answer for this. I'm really struggling with the hate right now. Yeah. But there's hope too. I definitely don't know what's run there. It's hope,
And Ed, would you want to follow?
But silent. So Ekta from the 1700s onwards has not really been a reality in the Sikh community. We've always had very significant differences, but when push came to shove, we did come together.
Right.
My experience, every single one of these questions, I could talk for a very long time, to be very honest. So I try and limit what I say, but I can inform you from my experience of WSO. So WSO, our model has worked. So I look a very different way. I have a very different Raat Maryada than my very good friend Jaskarn. So some of you are familiar with Jaskarn. He's a key part of our organization. He's a Mona, and he doesn't have the outward representation of Sikhi. We get along just fine. I've had in our organization people with very different opinions on all kinds of things. But what we do agree on is that we're going to work together on the community. And I think where those sentiments are there, then we find a way. Social media is a horrible thing. I don't have any social media accounts. I'll tell you something. I'll give you an example. My dad showed up at my house after the whole Trudeau announcement a few days later. He was very somber, and he goes, "Tu theek hai?" And I go, "I thought it generally." He goes, "Yeah, main theek hai." He goes, "Main comment pad raha si tere video de thalle." I was reading the comments under your videos. I was like, "Dad, I haven't even read them myself." He goes, "Okay, fit na padi." But social media is just very, very toxic. So my engagement is usually in person. That makes things a lot better. But anyways.
Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead. Thank you so much for coming.
So I also have an lecture and set up a question. No, I'm joking. My question is that it's great the panel here have put themselves forward to take questions from CBC, but to the panel, do you not think it's time tables were turned and we got the opportunity to actually ask questions to CBC? Not you, Michelle, you've been great, but maybe your editors, maybe Natasha Pate and others, that we have very serious questions to put towards about the type of coverage we're seeing about our community. And for CBC also see National Post, Vancouver Sun, Global, CTV, City News. So was it time we turn the tables and get those opportunities? And if you agree that it is, what can we do to make that happen? Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Well, that was a question for you, Michelle.
Yeah, I don't know.
I didn't think of the questions as.
I
Do the panel agree results there? Like you just say, okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that's been a key frustration in the way that I've kind of tried to start to analyze and break apart the coverage and the platforming of certain voices in the media. Again, these stories haven't been published yet, but to analyze the track records of the reporters who are doing the reporting and to showcase that to people from a historical perspective. So why are these people being platformed? Who have these people platformed in the past? And to question also, there are formal channels for us to respond to media organizations. And I think we've had conversations about this, writing to their ombudsmans, having these formal things issued as complaints, because again, we've seen in many cases that, like I mentioned earlier, media organizations are lazy. So they'll interview just about anybody who's willing to talk sometimes about certain issues. And that leads to the platforming of people who do not have Sikhs' best interest at heart. And so I think the best thing that we can do is use our voices to call it out for what it is, to issue complaints and to call on them to do better and to actually platform Sikh voices, because we can look at this room, there's no shortage of them that want to contribute to a productive dialogue.
After the Trudeau visit, we launched something called Ask Canadian Sikhs. And that was, the media never actually want to talk to actual Canadian Sikhs. They want to talk to Ujjwal Dosanjh, and they're entitled to do so, but understand that he comes with a background, he comes with an agenda, and definitely he's a prominent figure, but he certainly doesn't represent the Sikh community. Basically what the message is that journalists have this Rolodex of people that they've interviewed for decades, and they don't want to update it. It takes too much time. And we met with editorial boards, and it was a long slog, actually. Have things changed dramatically? I think we've seen definite change. And part of that is actually having Sikh voices in these institutions, in these media houses. And that's super important. But there's a lot more work that needs to take place because we're still seeing people with agendas. So Natasha Fatah, she had this Saturday segment that brought on Rupa Subramaniam and this other basically right-wing Hindutva spokesperson. And we did write to the ombudsperson, and the producer then gave us this answer that, well, we pointed out that Natasha Fatah has retweeted like Hindutva accounts and stuff, but they were like, well, her father passed away recently and it makes sense. But when you have these people that have agendas and backgrounds, they're not neutral. But then why are they reporting on Sikh issues? Like if you're not neutral, then it doesn't make sense that you're reporting. You're not giving a balanced picture. So I think there's still work to be done. But when I compare it to 2018, the coverage was much better this time, in my opinion.
And even with that interview with Rupa, one of the bits that just astounded me, and every time you go on, you pre-interview, they will ask you a set of questions just to see what your views are, and then they'll bring you on. And she had also been asked questions. She had the impression that the producers weren't interested in it, and she kind of baited them online. And I think that kind of forced their hand to bring her on. But, at the same time, one of the questions asked of her, which she avoided answering, was, how is the Sikh and Hindu community right now? There's an issue there when you turn it into this kind of one religion versus another. That's an old kind of trick used to disenfranchise Sikhs. But I kind of was just offended. I was like, she actually has no interaction with either community from what I can see. She has a podcast or something on True North. That's her audience nowadays. Why is she now suddenly someone who's being asked, how are the Sikhs and Hindus feeling? She has no idea, you know? And you think journalistically, did the producers not realize that? They must have asked pre-interview questions. They must have known enough about her, especially her kind of views during the Freedom Convoy at times, and kind of her beliefs on COVID and various other things, that she has views that are not kind of mainstream in the middle. Why are you now bringing this person up to ask them how the Sikh community is feeling? She has no idea. She's never talked to us. She never asked us. But that's on the CBC. That's on them for bringing this person up and asking them. Now, someone who's not a Sikh, someone who's not from the community, would automatically think that by being asked these questions, she's being legitimized, that, she must have a view that she's interacted with these communities when she absolutely hadn't.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was distracted. We're trying to work out the time here. We're getting so many questions, so we're going to extend a little bit by a few minutes. Thank you for that. So, yes, go ahead, please.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question today to the panelists, organizers. We've discussed the assassination of Shaheed Nijjar, threats and foreign interference, which is very important. And Shaheed Nijjar was affiliated with Sikhs for Justice, SFJ, and Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara Surrey. He was the head of the Canadian chapter of the Khalistan referendum. And furthermore, another executive committee member of Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara also currently faces threats. I would like to ask you why no representative was invited from Sikhs for Justice, SFJ, or Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara, as they could best explain the situation regarding threats to safety and foreign interference. I think best practice requires that the most relevant parties are included in discussions of this nature, and I think this would maybe be a question for the organizer of today's event.
So, City of Thought. So, thank you very much for that question. With the organizers stuff team, stress that yet?
Yeah, I think it's extremely valid point. It's a great idea. It was probably an oversight on my part. I think sometimes when we organize events like this, we're trying to create some safety in a space, and so there is a tendency to, I think, reach out to some known channels. And I did my best, and we did our best to line up a diverse panel, but one that we were familiar with and that we could try to shape the conversation. But it doesn't all have to happen here tonight, right? This is a habit that I would love for our community to form, right? I would love for us to have these conversations all the time so that, the other speakers can be invited, we can create those forums, and it can happen. But I absolutely take the point. I think to have somebody from Gurdwara Sikh Gurdwara would have been a great idea. But again, a lot changed, right? Because this panel was originally invited, this venue was originally booked back in August, right? Mm-hmm. And since then, we've had the panel change entirely in like the last 2 weeks, let alone, coming up to tonight. But no, I take that critique very closely, and I think it's a great idea, and we can bring that up for future events.
Hi, everyone. My name's Danita. I'm a co-founder for Poetic Justice. I appreciate the questions, but what I've been very mindful about is giving space to all voices. So who represents me on this panel? And I respect the fact that there's Sikhs for Justice, and there's a lot of other voices that have been leading voices for Sikhs, but they don't always represent me. And so I think creating these safe spaces where we challenge what has been the narrative. I'm a Dalit. Where's Dalit Sikhs? I'm a woman. How many times have women been represented?
Well,
and so I'm also very supportive of the pattern that Moral and WSO put together. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Anita.
But I would just like to add to that, the passion we're seeing today with people coming and making slightly longer than usual statements. And the fact that this seems, we can't tell from here, but it seems like it's sold. I can't see any empty seats. Shows a lot of judgment in this community. I completely agree that sometimes, we want representatives from Gurukars or other organizations to come here, but this isn't the do and end all of this. If anything, this is an indication of how much thirst there is within our community to have these discussions and maybe have people we don't agree with sitting next to each other and openly discussing, rather than just biting at each other on Twitter or somewhere like that. So I'm actually quite, I completely agree with, there is a need for other panelists, but I'm actually quite heartened by the fact that this is completely packed out. And everyone's been so respectful and asking a lot of questions, and it shows that our community really does take itself extremely seriously.
That's that. I'm talking myself.
No, but that's broad city to that. Yes, that's the race.
My daughter.
Hi. So I just quickly wanted to talk about the term South Asian that came up in today's discussion. And kind of as mentioned, that it is kind of a racist device that has erased a lot of our identities, especially in like a lot of spaces, whether it's academic, whether it's in media, and especially as a Sikh Canadian woman, I also agree that it erases my identity. So I guess me coming up here, I was just hoping if you could just expand on this topic a little bit more, especially as there is our younger generation in this audience as well, and our identity as Sikhs is so important. I just think that this term South Asian, it really just kind of erases us and erases my identity as a Sikh Canadian. So I was just hoping if you could just briefly talk about that.
Hey, would you like to expand on that for a feeling?
I've already done my piece. Everyone knows my piece.
I absolutely agree. I think, it's interesting. The past few years, I've been feeling like a different energy every time I claim my Sikh identity. And I haven't felt that before in earlier years. So now all of a sudden when I'm in professional spaces or work spaces, I say I'm a Sikh or I'm a Sikh Canadian or Punjabi Sikh. It has a different, for some reason, like loadedness to it. And I don't mean loadedness by negativity. It almost means like you're pushing back against something when you use that language, right? When you claim your Sikh identity. The word South Asian is an academic term too. So within academic spaces, institutions are made around South Asia in order to be able to encapsulate all the different regions of the South Asian region. So it has kind of an academic purpose, and it does have a colonial purpose as well. It is an easy way for institutions to be able to kind of create things and work through things like the museum, right? Which is the current conversation that's taking place here in BC. I just want to be mindful, like, what is the solution then? Like, we've got a Sikh Heritage Museum in Abbotsford. So what's the solution? We want another Sikh museum, or we want to give it a name? Like, we're talking specifically, I feel the elephant in the room is the museum. Like, what is it that we want? And just because the language right now is being used South Asian doesn't mean we're not going to have Sikh conversations in whatever cultural capacity, space, living museum this thing is going to be. We are going to have conversations about the genocide. We are going to have conversations about Sikhi. We are going to have conversations that mean something to the majority of the community here in BC. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So I just want people to be creative again about what it is that we are doing, what it is we're pushing back against. 100% in spaces, say you're Sikh, say you're Sikh. I'm not saying don't do that. But what we're talking about in terms of museum is a totally different kettle of fish. It's a totally different conversation. It's creating a whole entire institution. And what is it that we're looking for, and how can we insert our Sikh identity in that process? I probably don't make any sense right now, but I think we're all kind of huddling around this museum conversation. I'm saying it's going to come eventually, but I'm also saying let's continue to claim our Sikh identity when we enter these spaces, when we're called in to maybe be a community professional in this creative space. Maybe young professionals are going to be the graphic designers, the curators, the artists, the photographers. there's so much exciting possibility. And I'm more hopeful about the exciting possibility of Sikhs entering this space, whatever the space is going to be.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's the province that's decided this. It's not coming from within the community, and that is part of what causes the issue. I'm not even convinced, for example, would they showcase Sikh genocide? We don't know.
I mean, they better.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, who are fighting against the name, and I've said to them, at some point that issue may be resolved, but don't take it off the ball, because once its constitution is set, once its structure is set, be aware of what will be allowed to be presented in there. And the fact that this is coming from the province and not from the community is probably part of where the issues are. It may be easier for the community just to create its own museum that it manages, and even then make sure that there's a constitution, that there's spaces there for ideas they may, be uncomfortable with. But it's the province headache. We're just here for all right.
And that's my actual problem with that term. It's externally imposed. I've already talked about that. But for example, I had a meeting with Statistics Canada, and they were talking about a South Asian study that they wanted to do. And they said, they met with a number of individuals of the community. And my response to them was, well, a report on South Asians in Canada is not useful to me. Like, it means nothing to me. Like, how well educated are South Asians? I don't know what that means. Like, it has no relevance. If you told me how well educated Sikhs are, or what sort of employment Sikhs have, then that's relevant to me. So if you're asking me how I want to identify myself, language-wise, Punjabi, faith-wise, Sikh, and if I had to pick an identity, I'd say Sikh. So I think governments need to hear that South Asian is not our term, and they need to have the pushback from our community that this isn't an acceptable term, and none of us should identify or adopt that identity if we're not comfortable with it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, Kaur.
Hi there. So panelists, you have discussed Khalistan, you have discussed Sikh unity, and you have discussed by Hardeep Singh Nijjar's death and Sharanjit. So have you participated in the referendum or attended by Hardeep Singh Nijjar's funeral? And does participating in that contribute to the unity of us as Sikhs? If not.
Thank you. Is there someone you specifically would like to add?
No. So still around.
You guys.
So, no, I didn't attend the funeral, and I didn't vote in the Khalistan referendum. But I also am curious what that means then. Am I not defined as being worthy of being on the panel? Am I not able to speak on Sikh issues? Am I not able to teach about Sikhi? Am I not able to, represent Sikhi? What does that mean? It doesn't mean I don't speak out about the assassination in my workplaces. It doesn't mean I don't challenge somebody who says that there's Hindu phobia taking place, like amongst my own, right? It doesn't mean I don't challenge that. But I'm a mother to a teenager and a preteen, and I have an 80-year-old mother-in-law at home. We all have different situations in our places and spaces. And what I'm finding is that we are judged by what we either post on social media or don't post on social media or do. And therefore, that becomes the defining feature of how we are living and doing our seva in every aspect of our life. I engage in deeply embedded seva with youth Sikhs around me in all spaces. I will bend over backwards for any young Sikh who comes to me and asks for advice, asks me to help them get a job, asks me to help, a reference letter they may need. That's my give back to my community. So I just want to be mindful that when we're asked targeted questions like that, it doesn't become a way to define who we are as Sikhs or we are less or more than. So I'm just super mindful.
Referendum, no, I haven't voted in it. Hasn't come to Victoria yet. But I don't know if SFJ is here. I know it's costly, but we are waiting in Victoria. No, I didn't go to a funeral. Personally, if you all ask me personally, because it's more of a personal question, yes, I do regret it, not going. But you also have to remember part of it was the shock of what happened. That, maybe a year earlier, I can't remember when, but I personally did a lot of research on security, knew that there were issues with how RAW behaves in this country. A lot of people don't realize CSIS, for example, has parliamentary oversight. RAW doesn't. RAW reports directly to the Prime Minister through a cabinet. Even within India, RAW has ruffled a lot of MPs' fears because there's no parliamentary oversight. They can literally do what they want as long as the PM is happy with it and they don't get caught. If you don't know what RAW is, then go and land that. So things like that, there's a lot of things one regrets not doing, but be aware that it was quite a shock to have written about something and almost predicted that there is this massive concern, and then to see this assassination happen months later is a bit of a shock to the system. So,
yeah, to answer your question, no, I did not vote in the referendum, and no, I didn't attend the funeral. But I think to echo Sharon's point, I think when we speak about unity and then we come into these conversations of calling out instead of calling in order to determine which measures can deem somebody worthy again of having these conversations, we run into these issues where we are having a measuring contest of who is worthy of raising the same issues, the same values that we say that we all have. And then that is the liberation of Sikhs. And so I think that that is a conversation that I think is what we should be focusing on. And I think that that's something that is productive in order to move forward from this really critical time we find ourselves in.
So I'll make it a sweet. I didn't vote in the referendum, and I'll be open about it. I have my disagreements with Sikhs for Justice. I respect them as an organization. For example, the work that they've done on the term Sikh genocide was very good, and I think the idea of a referendum is actually very powerful, and it served an important purpose. That having been said, I do take issue with some of the messaging. I think some of the messaging has been harmful. But these are conversations that I'm not wanting to air our dirty laundry in front of the world. In terms of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, it was difficult for me to come from Toronto, to be very honest. I wish I could have come. One of the previous speakers said that Hardeep Singh Nijjar was, the top guy for Sikhs for Justice. I think Hardeep Singh Nijjar was just a very Panthic person. Like, I can't say I'm a very close friend of his. I had met him on a number of occasions, spoken to him. But he was one of those people that wanted to do something for the Panth. And whoever was doing something for the Panth, he was with them. And I think that's how a lot of us have to start thinking, that it's not just about a Jathebandi or our organization. It's about, if someone's doing something for the Panth, then let's help them and certainly not stand in their way. So those are my 2 cents.
We'll take that. We have to.
I think Mr. Balpreet Singh was referring to the question I had earlier, so I think I have the sort of right to respond to that. I would like to clarify that Shahid Nijjar did contribute a lot to the Khalistan referendum campaign. He was the head of the Canadian chapter. He, contributed his blood, sweat, and tears for that organization and for that referendum. It was his dream that hundreds of thousands of people vote in that referendum, which did come true on recently, right, as you've all seen in the media as well. Secondly, I think the previous, our sister who spoke, her question was referred to as targeted. I don't think she was targeting. She was simply asking if you had done that. It was your choice if you would like to respond to that or not, if you did or not. And finally, I would say that, Victoria or Vancouver, that's not a big deal for us to travel. We've talked about our determination as Sikhs and what we can do. And I think that, small amount of travel time shouldn't prevent anyone from coming and voting in the referendum. And secondly, I would like to let everyone know that thousands of people came from other provinces, even other countries, to vote on that referendum. And in regards to the videos, yes, you can have your own personal opinions about that, but Mr. Pannu is an international human rights lawyer. He is admitted to the bar in New York, so he is aware of what sort of comments he makes, and he makes them in a proper and legal manner. So I don't think there should be any sort of derogatory comments towards him. Yes, everyone can keep their own opinions, but I'm aware of one panelist who did make some comments on social media regarding his latest message. So I think as a legal professional, he's aware of what sort of comments he's making, and he's aware of both the geopolitical context as well as the legal context.
Sir, thank you very much for your just I'll let the panelists respond to that at this point.
So I just wanted to, so I respect what you're saying, brother. I'm not saying that you're necessarily trying to do this, but what I think we need to avoid is saying Hardeep Singh Nijjar was a Sikhs for Justice Shaheed. And that sort of labeling, I think, is very destructive. So what I was trying to say, not saying that minimizing his role for Sikhs for Justice of the referendum, that's well known. Everyone knows that he was talking about the referendum, wanting people to show up for it. But fundamentally, he was a Panthic person. So a Sikh. So that wasn't necessarily the only, I think we have to give him an identity. I think he was a Panthic person and a Sikh, not a Sikhs for Justice Shaheed, but a Sikh Shaheed. When it comes to the second part about the videos, I'm going to say it. So it's come up, and so no one, if the video, the latest one anyways, was just that Sikhs for Justice wants to boycott Air India, that would be okay. I mean, you can boycott these sort of things. But when you say khatraya, jaan nu khatraya, which means your lives could be in danger, you can interpret it in whatever way you want. And I've seen interpretations afterwards saying that Sikhs traveling might be in danger. But when you're putting these things out there, you have to also say, how's this going to be interpreted? So I just think that sort of messaging is prone to misinterpretation. And as a lawyer, we're trained to put a message out there that it hits the spot, that it can't be misinterpreted. So that's my problem with that messaging. I'm not going to say what his intentions were. He can speak to his own intentions. But the way that messaging comes across and is then used against the community, I have a problem with that.
This is our final question for the evening.
Hello, thank you for letting me ask a question today. Sharanjit, you spoke about this a little bit, but I would like to hear more from all of you about the Sikhs in Canada and the power that we hold here. So it's no surprise that we hold a lot of political power. We're largely responsible for electing Trudeau. There's an election coming up along with an alarming rise in fascism. So can you please speak more to the alignment or misalignment that Sikhs have in Canadian politics? And if you think there are any calls to action for turning our grassroots activism into serious political clout?
Sure. Thank you very much. That's a tough question. That's a really tough question. I need time to think about that. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in.
I mean, I think we have to decide. I mean, Sikhs in Canada is such a broad term in this geographically. What people are feeling in the 905 about their daily lives, not just about Sikhi, but about their daily lives, very different from 604, very different from 250. They're very different life experiences in these different parts of the country. Anyone who panders to extremism, which I think is maybe partly what you're talking about, we need to definitely call them out on that and be concerned. But we also have the issue, I don't know whether it's prevalent in the Sikh community, but, one issue we always have is not a lot of youth voting. That becomes an issue. So people with, who just want to protect their pensions or, whatever it is old people want to do, we vote accordingly. Now, for me, this round or whatever the next election is, whether it's provincial or federal, for me personally, I need to know, are they taking security seriously? Why is this fracture between the federal government and the provinces? Why is our Premier completely clueless about intelligence in the sense of he's not being fed information? Those, I think, for me are issues, but a Sikh in Alberta or a Sikh in Halifax are going to have different views, right? So, and what's important for them as a Sikh, as well as what their local issues are. It's the same in India. We talk a lot here, but then when you look in India and you see how Sikhs vote there, you can't sometimes a lot of it's done, but they're voting based on what their immediate needs are. Sometimes they're in poor areas and they're in survival mode. If a politician comes and builds a hospital, they're going to vote for that politician, whether that politician's party did something horrific before or is doing something horrific now. So I think politics is always a complex area, and I think for most of us, in truth, our Sikh identity plays a certain part in how we vote, but then there's other aspects, what are the MLAs or MPs talking about with healthcare in Surrey? I mean, these issues are important to us as well. So I think Sikh identity and our concern as Sikhs play a part, but based on other parts of what we're thinking about when it comes to elections.
And I also want to draw on your comments. I need time to percolate and think about power, right? And historically, our power was drawn from the Gurdwaras. Like wherever Sikhs were, as far as Yubo, Golden BC, parts of Vancouver Island, we created Gurdwaras. And those Gurdwaras were spaces for critical conversations around what is taking place around us. Gadar poetry was read, right? Like there was conversations that were ignited. It was think tank style conversations. I wonder if there's hope where we can somehow create synergy that Gurdwaras can become spaces like that again, right? Like how do we, and I think there are a lot of Gurdwaras in Surrey and New West where it's youth led and youth driven. So where are these youth having conversations around the previous question about mental health, healthcare? Are there professionals in Gurdwara spaces who can speak? Can we stop giving podiums just to uncles, right? What can we do with them? There are people taking up podium space. In Abbotsford, again, there was a conference the Gurdwara Khalsa Aid Society hosted on Baba Karam Singh Daulatpur. So he was a Gadarite in Abbotsford. And I was really impressed with how they organized this conference. They hosted it at the Heritage Gurdwara. Intellectual, just conversations about history and his Baba, Daulatpur's story and the Gadar movement and how does that connect to, Sikh practice around critical thinking and fighting and revolution took place in a Gurdwara. That's so cool that they hosted a conference and it was totally diverse and who was speaking as well. Why don't we bring in conferences into Gurdwara spaces and have these conversations? There's something so powerful when you are in front of a Gurdwara and you stand on that podium. There's something so powerful when you were given that Sangat space to directly address, our Sangat. And women especially don't get that opportunity, right? We don't get that opportunity to bring our expertise to that podium or stand. So maybe we need to really somehow, I feel like we have this conversation all the time. Maybe we need to model Gurdwaras that are doing it right and maybe mimic those in other Gurdwara spaces as well, for sure.
Just to add on that, I think that we all have sometimes a short political memory. And I think going back to something we talked about at the beginning of this conversation is holding politicians accountable for the things they say and do. So remembering how these issues or how their words impacted Sikhs, how they reacted to issues that are affecting us right now, and continuing to hold them accountable for actually meaningfully addressing these issues. So,
yeah. And the addiction ones.
Really briefly, I think we need to rethink how we engage with politics as a community. We're definitely very, very engaged. Probably one of the, if not the most engaged community. But when we look at the results of that engagement, then leads me to wonder, is our investment worth the return? The current model where we heavily, get involved in these nominations and send members of our community to elected office. I can't speak in generalities about anything, but many of the people that we have ended up sending, have they been voices for our community? Or are they following the old Indian model of politics, which is I'll come to your account part, eat a couple of pakode, you can take some photos. But when you actually want to talk about the issues or want me to talk about the issues, then I'm not equipped to do that. And in fact, it's been like, this is once again an event in itself to discuss. But like honestly, in 2015, I thought we've made it. Finally, we're at the table in large numbers that our issues will be addressed. What I found is that the politicians have their own interests in gatekeeping and creating their own value. So if the politicians, the head of the party, the prime minister wants to know what's going on in the Sikh community, it's better for that elected official to say, I'll tell you, instead of letting the prime minister or that leader go to the community and actually hearing it. And there's so many self-interested things happening there. And many of the positions that some of these elected officials have taken and told the leadership actually don't reflect what's happening in the community or the voice of the community. And they've done so for their own reasons. I'm speaking in sort of a mysterious language. I can speak maybe one day more openly, but it's not been the solution that we thought it was. Having the right people, like, okay, I can talk about one that was a right person, Manmeet Singh Pullar. Manmeet Singh Pullar was unapologetically Sikh, and when it came to a Sikh issue, he was willing to, draw a line and say, this is the way it's going to be. But the Afghanistan Sikh issue for me was such a disappointment. We had a vulnerable community of 200 Afghan Sikhs who were desperately crying out to be saved. And we brought dogs and cats from Afghanistan, but we couldn't arrange evacuation for this community. And now, there's been some progress made, and many have been brought to Canada. Many are still waiting in Delhi. The vast majority have left Afghanistan. But that showed me that even when there was a very legitimate situation, our politicians weren't able to deliver.
Thank you for that question. We do have two more folks who have been patiently waiting in line, so we'll let them come up and ask the questions. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much for accommodating me. My name is Lane Gante. I was born in Manipur, India, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to, first of all, just broadly thank the Sikh community for standing with us in our time of deep trauma. And without going into much detail, since early May this year, my community, the Kukizo minority tribals in Manipur, have been subjected to ethnic cleansing. And even as we speak, we've got a ongoing something that resembles a civil war and a possible genocide. But during this whole time, I think friends from the Poetic Justice Foundation, they strongly supported us. And even during some of the protest events outside the Consulate General here at Vancouver, several people from the Sikh community came out. And I was also invited to the Guru Nanak Gurudwara to go and speak and talk about the Manipur issue. So I really appreciate this opportunity and this conversation. And, I'm just very, very thankful to be here. And I don't actually question. I just wanted to say thank you. And, what the last speaker just said about the small community from Afghanistan, it just hits home so closely for me, because we're like, if you guys think you're a small community, just imagine where I am. Like, we're a tiny fraction of even your community. So thank you for standing with us, and thank you for the solidarity.
And yes, we have one more still here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for extending the time. My name is Chris Favanoff. I am a member of Socialist Alternative, and we have been working with groups like the Poetic Justice Foundation, thank you, Anita, and Mo and some other groups on the issue of caste discrimination. And it was encouraging to hear some of the panelists mention casteism in passing. And many of the people in the audience will know of the case, for instance, of Manoj Bangu. He was the Punjabi taxi driver who in 2018 was assaulted at work because of his caste. He was beaten, called a caste slur that I will not repeat. And this campaign that we're running now, where we're trying to pressure the BC government into making caste discrimination on the same level as sexism, racism, anti-LGBT hatred, etc., was inspired by a similar successful one in Seattle, where our city councillor, Shama Sawant, herself originally from India, was approached by Dalit workers and who were being horribly oppressed in the tech sector, being denied promotions, being even told they had to use different bathrooms. Some really disgusting stuff. That was a victorious battle, the first ban on caste discrimination outside the subcontinent in the entire world, made huge news in India. And I am curious as to, obviously we want to do a similar sort of thing here, pressure the BC government, force them into doing this. And of course, Sikhism is, opposed to casteism, to that sort of thing. But we know that, the reality is not always the same as the theory, unfortunately. And I would love to know what either your experiences have been in helping to combat this, or your observances of it, and how you think this battle can be won here in BC. Thanks.
Yes. I just have an observation to share. I think that's such an important thing. And I think as somebody who lives on social media and is of the younger generation, that's something that's extremely troubling to me, especially we see Sikh youth or young people, some on social media, and they again use caste as a sign of bravado, as a way to, get clout. I don't know if there's a academic term for that, but to try and, but on the other hand, they're talking about Sikh values. And like you said, that those two are not cohesive. So I think that there is a need to just call it out for what it is when we see it, whether it's on social media, whether it's in like you said, physical workplaces or other places. And again, to engage young people in that. And so to codify it in that way would be huge. But I think calling it out when we see it is one way to start, because I think that it's antithetical to, on the one hand, talk about caste and then try to talk about Sikh values.
Yeah, and I think fighting caste-based discrimination in Sikhi is also fighting Hindutva, right? You're doing that. You're also fighting the Brahmanism power structure that is intimately connected to Modi and India and what is currently taking place. So it's not like, right? It's not like if you do that, somehow we're shaming our own community. It exists. It exists at times of dating, marriage. It exists as young as like 20-year-olds nowadays. It exists in my son's school, where kids are asking each other what caste they are. It exists. So we need to stop denying the fact it exists and just saying, oh, Baba Nanak said, there's no caste-based discrimination. We found, these principles. Yeah, we're not actually enacting out those principles. And the level of violence that's taking place is so vast here in British Columbia. So I'm excited that you're working with Poetic Justice Foundation. And I think there's lots of good movement taking place simply because Seattle's done it. Like they're a very close neighbor. So I think there's a lot of hope that it can be brought here. But we as Sikhs need to really call out our own hypocrisy first, because we're in denial that it exists. Yeah.
So I should add one other thing that was a very good point, that there was a huge fight in Seattle against the Modi fans, against the Hindutva people. And that was a huge factor, was mobilizing unions, including the Alphabet Workers Union of Google workers, and not giving them an inch, because they laid out, very false claims of Hinduphobia in a very cynical way. And, we did not let them get away with it. And we went back and hit back twice as hard as they tried to hit us. And that was absolutely key. And that's going to be key, I think, in BC, or if this were to, come up in other parts of Canada. I think that a combative approach is really necessary.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that our organization is supportive of this, and anything we can do to help push this, we would make ourselves available. But you are absolutely right, recognizing that the creation of this term Hinduphobia and then weaponizing it to oppose things like recognition of caste discrimination, this is happening in Canada. The Conservatives presented this petition, I think, just within the past week, recognizing, calling for a recognition of Hinduphobia in Canada. And there honestly is no rising hate against Hindus. This is a creation of the Modi government. So that's what we're going to be up against. But this is something that all minorities that are once a part of India, we can come together to work together on.
I'll just throw a final addition to it. Personally, I would say stop talking about whatever caste you belong at home. You'll kill it in a generation.
Really work too, and you can tell. So we are going to start wrapping up now. Just very quickly, any final thoughts from you? Where do we go from here? If we can just briefly address that, so we can leave people with some thoughts looking forward, probably ahead.
I think we go with respect. Back to what Jindi was saying about how grateful he is that in this room, where you can sense the fraughtness amongst all of us, mostly everybody came with care and respect. And I really appreciate that, because it is not easy coming up on a stage where people have differing opinions. And I hope that when we have conversations like this, we continue to come with care and respect with each other.
I'll just go down the line and final thoughts from each of you.
We need more of these. As some of the members had asked, with different views and thoughts. I'm a full advocate for that. I think that's extremely important. I think it's also important to have on the stage people you don't agree with, so you can hash out these differences. Too often as a community, we keep those opinions to ourselves. We don't want to talk publicly about different views, but I think here we've covered so much. And it's a testimony to our community that we feel so passionate about so many issues. So
there's certainly passion.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think even just looking out into the audience, there's a range of ages, and that's so wonderful to see. I think there's a need for more of this, and I think that I was talking to Mo before this, that I want to continue having these conversations and hopefully sitting in the audience next time and listening to people speak. But yeah, I think that just being able to share our stories, share our knowledge, share our insight, there's a clear hunger for everybody to learn. And I don't think anybody's sitting up here or in the audience thinking they have all the answers, but there is a desire to move forward collectively. So I think let's keep that in the back of our minds as we move forward from here.
David Fonton.
I'll just say that Sikhi is that which will save the Sikhs. So all of us have a personal connection with Sikhi, and I think all of us need to develop that. The call of the time really is that when we're being challenged as a people, that we need to understand who we are, and we need to build that spiritual connection, because our shaheeds in the 1700s, 1800s, and even up to the present time, what inspired them to give everything up? It was love. They were expressing love for their guru, expressing love for their panth, for the world. And where does that love come from? That love comes from their connection with Barney, connection with Sikhi, with Naam. So I would really encourage you. Sikhi, for me, it's the most inspiring thing. I can't imagine my life without it. But the amazing thing about Sikhi is that you don't have to actually die to get the benefits of it. It's a process. And if you're growing as a person, you'll notice it. And you're saying Sikhi's working. So I just ask all of you that who identify as Sikh, give Sikhi a chance and see it actually works. It's real.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Jindi Singh, Balpreet Singh, Sharon, Kaur, Sandhra, and Rumneek Johal. Thank you for this conversation. Yes, well, I do.
And Bulwark is one of us today about a million years.
And that means right back to Shakush.
All right. I'm just going to ask the panelists to just stay where you are for a minute. I'll let you go in just a second. Just get one more round of applause for everyone. Michelle, the panelists. So I said at the outset that we knew we wanted to have this conversation, but we didn't know what we were going to get out of it. And that's kind of by design, right? Because we need space to express ourselves. So I know, hopefully like me, some of you in the audience are going to walk away really happy with tonight. I know we may have disappointed some, and that's okay, right? Because we learn from those disappointments and we can learn and do better. So hopefully this effort was appreciated, and we're open and welcome any sort of feedback on how to improve so we can keep doing work like this. I feel like the last speaker, the question, the conversation was kind of a perfect segue into me talking about Poetic Justice Foundation just a little bit before we close tonight. We founded this organization a couple of years ago because we found that the spaces that we wanted to talk in unapologetically required a lot of compromise, right? And I say this as a founder of multiple not-for-profits where I didn't see any boards around me that I could sit on and, have that freedom of expression. My co-founder Anita expressed the same thing. There just wasn't enough people, or places where we could go where we could be as free and liberated as we wanted to be, right? And I think that's my biggest encouragement to our audience is that there is a fear in our community, right? There's a fear even around events like tonight. I know for a fact that there's people that didn't join us tonight because there's worry of the, surveillance, right? Of who's going to see us there, right? Is that going to create a challenge for us to get visas to visit our homeland in the future? And this has been hanging over our heads for decades, right? Just this threat of exile, right? Of don't talk, don't express your values, your actual Sikh values, or else we'll exile you, right? And recently exile has turned into psychological attacks. Will malign you, will harass you, will troll you online, and it's extended all the way through to physical attacks now, as we've seen, right? So what's the point of being afraid anymore, right? Because at least here, there's enough freedom, there's enough space for us to express ourselves. So my internal hope for myself even, right, is to be increasingly fearless. And if, Sikhi is that which will help Sikhs, then, I'm on my continuous path as well, right? Myself and Anita both consider ourselves Sikhs now, right, at this stage in life. But we're kind of working backwards now and kind of rediscovering what that means and trying to integrate it and trying to bring that into our lives. And forums like this are one opportunity for us to do that.